Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the 10th Dimension. I just finished the chapter in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections on confrontation with the unconscious. And I just wanted to kind of highlight some things and share with you what stood out to me. The first thing is on myth in general, and what is modern man's myth? You know, how I understand it is that there's these archetypes, and the one main one is the hero's journey. That's why we're drawn to movies like Star Wars, to Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. They contain these human blueprints that we're drawn to. There's something within us that resonates with the hero's journey. And so I ask, what is modern man's myth? We're not battling dragons and we're not going on these grand quests necessarily. And so what does that look like today? Because it provides a level of meaning and tapping into like this ancestral blueprint that we have as beings. So he wrote a book about the hero, the myth in which man has always lived. But in what myth does man live nowadays? So that's one of the big questions that I want to dive into as I continue looking at Carl Jung's work. A lot to do with alchemy, Hermes Trismegistos, that lineage, which, a lot of the mysticism I've studied has come from the Eastern traditions, and I'm curious to dive more into the Western forms of mysticism, Gnosticism, and alchemy. He's had these powerful dreams that indicated to him that his unconscious was being activated. Now, I had a dream recently where I felt in a similar way. I'd been waiting for a dream that was I was looking for my unconscious to speak to me, and I did have a dream with the wise old man archetype, and I'm still trying to figure out the dream, but that figure, that archetype appeared, and so that gives me material to work with, and that is typically associated with the unconscious, these different archetypes. He was showing a lot of resistance to working with the unconscious. Here he says, I gave in only after endless resistances and with a sense of resignation. So we're dealing with forces and powers that are beyond our conscious ego. And this makes sense because if we're looking at the psyche as a whole, and we're looking at our inheritance as humans, we contain a lot in the database. So technically, we have access to, let's think about this, all the dreams, memories, myths, stories that have occurred since the beginning of time. And this kind of corresponds with the psychedelic experience and why there's a certain level of mind training that I feel like should be done prior to having different experiences with entheogens, I like to call them, because they can really reveal a side to the mind that you may not be familiar with. So meditation is a great way to start exploring that and also working with your dreams. He had these dreams where he had to figure out the meaning to them. This was an interesting line, but there was a demonic strength in me, and from the beginning there was no doubt in my mind that I must find the meaning of what I was experiencing in these fantasies. He doesn't go into detail. I think he was doing his form of active imagination, and how I understand it is like almost as hypnagogic imagery, which is the imagery you may experience right before you drift off to sleep. So it's almost like pre-dream dreams, images. And he says here, I was frequently so wrought up that I had to do certain yoga exercise in order to hold my emotions in check. So as a result of him working with the unconscious, he was experiencing pretty unpleasant sensations and experiences within his mind, different psychic tensions. He also is stressing here the importance of converting these emotions into images, to find the images which were concealed in the emotions. I was inwardly calmed and reassured. Had I left those images hidden in the emotions, I might have been torn to pieces by them. So, we're diving deep here. Jung's psychology is known as depth psychology because we are going into the unconscious material. Record your dreams for a month straight and, you'll get a taste of what I'm talking about. He says here, only by extreme effort was I finally able to escape from the labyrinth. I think he's speaking to the labyrinth of his unconscious. This is a powerful dream. He talks about it was a hero and solar myth, a drama of death and renewal, the rebirth symbolized by the Egyptian scarab. I won't go fully into the details of that dream, but this book is definitely worth a read if you're interested in psychology and dreams and you're really getting his personal experiences. Psychology is a new science. They're really trying to make it into like a hard science like biology and chemistry, and that's what Freud was trying to do, so that's why they split up. One of the reasons was Jung really wanted to expand upon Freud's theories, and I give credit to Freud, but I appreciate Carl Jung for expanding upon his theories and going into and sharing the material that he experienced that he wasn't really able to reveal during his time as a physician. Here he's speaking about a dream where it was an old man, a young woman, and a black serpent, which he didn't really understand until later. Then he brings up this important figure, Philemon, which eventually turned into this like inner guru for him. Here he describes him as a pagan and brought with him an Egypto-Hellenistic atmosphere with a Gnostic coloration. That's gonna need to dive into that. Egyptian, Greek, Hellenistic, Gnostic coloration. I don't really know what that means, but sounds pretty cool. So, yeah, here he says, since I did not understand this dream image, I painted it in order to impress it upon my memory. I find this very interesting. I remember a dream, and this is one of the images that came to my mind that I want to kind of put on paper. It was a dream where I was interacting with this man who was like crippled. Outwardly he appeared crippled, and then he turned into this being, this like cheetah that had wings, which was like a very powerful image. And the thought that immediately comes to mind is like the ego is kind of like this crippled person that is able to do things, but there's a deeper, more powerful force within the overall structure. So that's just conjecturing there. Philemon, this is that inner guru, and other figures of my fantasies brought home to me the crucial insight that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. He speaking to the autonomy of these different psychic figures, which is very interesting. It's like they have a life of their own. You're not really in control of them. He talks about a meeting with an Indian man who said there are ghostly gurus too. Most people have living gurus, but there are always some who have a spirit for a teacher. Which Jung then confirmed. He's like, oh yeah, this character Philemon is this teacher to me. This talk of demon stuff is kind of interesting. He's talking about Philemon had a lame foot but was a winged spirit, whereas Ka represented a kind of earth demon or metal demon. This got pretty technical. Philemon was a spiritual aspect or meaning, in quotes. Ka, on the other hand, was a spirit of nature like the anthroparian of Greek alchemy, with which at the time I was still unfamiliar. I'm still unfamiliar with these different Greek concepts, and also he's speaking about Ka. That's an Egyptian concept. So in ancient Egypt, the king's ka was his earthly form, the embodied soul. And that kind of relates to, in I think it's Tibetan Buddhism, they describe different kinds of bodies that you have. And there's also, in New Age philosophy, the astral body, subtle body, and then your gross body, which is your flesh and bones. And so on the theme of him trying to make it a science, this is where the resistance came from. He's like, I'm experiencing all this, crazy phenomenon in my dreams and my fantasies. And, he says, when I was writing down these fantasies, I once asked myself, what am I really doing? Certainly this has nothing to do with science, but then what is it? Whereupon a voice within me said, it is art. Whereupon a voice within me said, it is art. One thing that came up in the reading is, how are we distinguishing our thoughts? He is able to, well, one, the easy one would be if it's in a woman's voice. If a woman's voice was speaking to you and you are a man, then that would be considered the anima, which was like this inner wisdom, which had, as he describes in this chapter, positive and negative qualities. So continuing here, it never entered my head that what I was writing had any connection with art. Then I thought, perhaps my unconscious is forming a personality that is not me, but which is insisting on coming through to expression. I knew for a certainty that the voice had come from a woman. I recognized it as the voice of a patient, a talented psychopath who had a strong transference to me. She had become a living figure within my mind. On a side note, he was earlier speaking to, in a dream, encountering kind of a dwarf or a gnome-like figure. And a friend of mine who is in the medicine community had an experience where these different beings, you think of gnomes, elves, there's this theme of like little people. And they're almost, as she described them, like guardians to different levels of the mind. And she was describing that in an experience where, in a ceremony, she was at a point where she encountered one of these like gnome creatures, and it was guarding this memory that was kind of buried deep within her mind that she didn't go into the memory, but it ended up being like a traumatic memory. And that she, the gnome was kind of like, are you sure you want to go through this? And kind of granted her access into this part of her mind. We're talking about transpersonal psychology here. I know it might sound a little far out to some of you people, but these are some of the things that can come up within dreams, within ceremonies, and it's part of transpersonal psychology. Continuing on. Yeah, he talks about this crazy dream, or he was starting to experience like the presence of spirits in his house. And his children were having weird dreams and seeing weird things. And anyway, I think that's a little bit later, but it gets deep. The essential thing is to differentiate oneself from these unconscious contents by personifying them, and at the same time to bring them into relationship with consciousness. That is the technique for stripping them of their power. I am a huge fan of what it's called parts work, and he's touching upon this level of parts work that is with your unconscious. The gist of it is that you're taking things that are in your mind and you're kind of putting them on the table in images, in sculptures, in some form of external, as he uses the word, personification. And so you can work with them. If they remain up here, it kind of gets murky and confusing. If you can bring them out in a way, then that makes them Thus, the insinuations of the anima, the mouthpiece of the unconscious, can utterly destroy a man. And he's speaking about how when he was able to externalize the image, a lot of his inner psychic tension went away. He stressed the importance of having his daily routine of seeing patients, his family, as he was diving into this material. He said Nietzsche kind of lost his mind because he lost the ground under his feet, because he possessed nothing more than the inner world of his thoughts, which incidentally possessed him more than it. He got so lost in his mind and had no kind of family to tend to or job, what have you, that he just got lost in his mind. And again, repeating that, imagine diving into all the dreams, memories, history, stories of the collective human psyche. Whoa, it's a lot. Continuing on, it talks about the kind of spirits that were coming into his house, soul retrieval. Here he says, I dedicated myself to the service of the psyche. I loved it and hated it, but it was my greatest wealth. It's a powerful statement. He was getting so much richness by working with his mind, his dreams, his fantasies. And that it's not a linear process. It's a circumambulation is the word. Again, speaking on that, while I was working on them, he's speaking about mandalas, the question arose repeatedly, what is this process leading to? Where is its goal? From my own experience, I knew by now that I could not presume to choose a goal which would seem trustworthy to me. I had to let myself be carried along by the current without a notion of where it would lead me. Not everyone wants to do that. We have this way about life. We go to work, you got family, it's like, it's linear. It's clear. The process that he speaks about dealing with the unconscious is very messy. Cool synchronicity here. He created this mandala with a golden castle in the center. When it was finished, I asked myself, why is this so Chinese? And then, let's see, a couple weeks later, he received a letter from Richard Wilhelm enclosing the manuscript of a Taoist alchemical treatise entitled The Secret of the Golden Flower. Now, earlier he spoke about having these dreams of blood and gore, and he's getting quite concerned. And then a couple months later, World War I started. So synchronicity, premonition, that's diving down a whole nother wormhole. But there's a certain connection that we have called the collective unconscious, or you could just say collective consciousness. In the collective, we're all connected. So that's my wrap for the unconscious. Hope you got some value out of that. If you have any questions, let me know. Curious to hear your thoughts on what you think about the unconscious and the work of Carl Jung. So thanks for tuning in to the 10th Dimension. In this edition, we went over a chapter in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections on the unconscious. See you on the next one.